I'm going to need some energy.
Are we ready to... Oh, now I need to open my notes again. I'm sorry.
No worries.
It'll be right there. Okay, cool.
That was my situation too.
Google Chrome said restore, so thank you, Google Chrome. That was very nice. I can just whisper and you can still hear me.
It's like ASMR.
Okay, ready?
Did you get that? I'm so confused.
Also, ich verstehe nur Bahnhof.
You only understand train station? It's all Greek to me.
Understanding Train Station. Living Between Cultures with Josh and Feli.
Welcome back to a new episode of Understanding Train Station.
Welcome back, everyone. We're glad to have you.
Yeah. I'm Feli, or Felicia. I'm a German from Munich, Germany, who is currently living in Cincinnati, Ohio.
And I'm Josh. I'm an American who currently lives in Cincinnati, Ohio. That's where I'm from originally. But I will very soon be moving to Munich, Germany, which I've spent some time over there throughout the years. And I also speak German, so...
Yeah. And you hang out with a lot of German natives here in Cincinnati,
exactly.
So...
I'm looking forward to not having to always explain that. So when I'm living in Munich, hopefully that'll be a little smoother and just make a little more sense for everyone.
Yeah, our stories have always been so complicated.
Yeah.
Even when I first came here just for my exchange semester. By the way, if you guys want to hear the full story, you can go back to episode 1 because that's where I told the whole story. But even like my story kind of became more and more complicated each year. But even in the beginning, it was already kind of complicated each time. Like every time you and I and our friend Cynthia or like our friend Mallory were at a restaurant somewhere and we would speak German, people would come up and be like, hey, what language are you guys speaking?
Well,
Is it German?
we also got to the point, too, where we're so used to always having to tell our stories that we started to tell each other's stories because we were so tired of having to say our same script over and over
Exactly.
again.
It's exactly that, like a script. It's like, okay, because people are like, is it German? Oh, that's cool. Why do you speak German? And
well,
then
isn't that kind of why you started your YouTube channel, too, is you got tired of answering the same questions over and over again.
Yes.
So go check out our YouTube channel, everyone. It's
Thank you. You almost didn't remember.
I still need some coffee, so everyone's going to have a little bit of patience with me today. But we hope that you guys enjoyed the last episode with our friend Niklas, talking about work culture differences, work-life differences between the U.S. and Germany. We were super excited to have him here as our first guest.
Yes.
And so far the feedback has been great. We're recording this episode the day that it was published. So kind of throughout the day, we've been seeing all of the comments, and so far people have seemed to really enjoy it.
Yeah.
So we'll probably see if we can get him back on for another interview at some point. He's expressed interest as well. So, So this week, we have a little bit of a more personal, I guess you would say, episode. Not necessarily just a topic of culture differences between the U.S. and Germany, or even really differences about the language itself, but more about our stories of how we learned the target language. So how I learned German, and Feli, how you learned English.
Yeah, because that's one of the questions that people ask us the most, even in the comments, and just like overall, that's like what people DM us on Instagram or in emails. Do you have any tips as to how to learn English, how to learn German, how to lose your accent? How did you do it?
Yeah.
And so we thought that we would talk about all of that today, and we're also going to include some of your guys' questions into this episode today.
Exactly. So we've gotten a lot of feedback throughout the last couple episodes so far, and some questions have been asked. So moving forward, we're thinking of kind of maybe starting a section where we do a Q&A. So if you guys have any questions from this video and from any of the last videos, make sure to leave us comments on our Instagram, DM us on our Instagram, send us emails, and if you're watching via YouTube, leave a comment down in the comment section or a question, and we'll try to incorporate it if we can.
Yeah, and I think we're also going to do that today. So I was going to like include the language-related questions into the language part of the episode, and then at the end we're going to have like a little Q&A segment, which I don't think we have a name for that yet. Maybe we can come up with like a little name.
We'll try to be creative and come up with
Ask Josh
something.
and Feli, or like, I don't know, if you have an
Frag
idea
doch
for
mal.
a name, frag doch mal.
Keine Ahnung. Maybe
For some reason, Willi will's wissen comes to mind, but that doesn't make any sense at all.
Is that like an established thing from something else? I've never heard of it.
You don't know of it? It's an old kids show where like Willi, who is the host of the show, explains all these simple things to kids, like everyday things. He goes to like factories and like, how is this being made and why, you know, why are trees green and those kind of things. And he actually came back into like pop culture, or like he was back on Twitter and everything recently because there was like this scandal about him where people started digging into old episodes and then taking sentences that he said out of context and making it seem like he was not politically correct and those kind of things. And so he was recently back on the internet.
So that's probably why you're thinking of him again.
Yeah, that's a little side story, not relevant at all for this episode.
But yeah, we'll come up with a creative name for the Q&A section, hopefully.
So I guess let's start with our language stories. And I think that you should start, Josh, because I feel like your story is a lot more interesting than mine. So how did you start learning German? How did you manage? I mean, because you started in school and then now you're fluent without almost any accent. So what's your secret? What's your story?
The thing is, like, I think it's interesting to look back, and obviously it was a lot of work, but now in this moment, I don't feel like I put a ton of time into it, which I obviously had to, but it was kind of a natural process for me because I was so interested and had a strong motivation, which I think is something that you need if you're going to learn a language at a high level.
Yeah.
But just kind of going back into the history, pre-German Josh, which is just kind of crazy to think about.
I can't even picture that person.
Yeah. Well, a lot of my friends now don't know. I mean, I have a lot of German friends, so they don't know me prior to when I could speak German. And it's interesting because at my high school, there were a couple exchange students who knew me right when I was first starting to learn. And like, I remember like trying to talk with them with like my German 1 level skills. And then I can remember, I think it was when I did my first internship in Germany, I sent one of them a voice message because I wanted to try to meet up with them and catch up. And they were so confused. They're like, what? You could speak German? Like, you sound like a native speaker. What's going on? Because they remembered little Josh who could barely say, ich will einen Hund haben.
That's awesome.
But yeah, so I started learning German in 10th grade, which is pretty late even for the American system. Most people start learning like Spanish in like 6th or 7th grade, just with like little words like, how do you say the different fruits and that type of stuff. But my school started offering German in 9th grade, but I was pretty involved in music, so I didn't take any language classes. And then I just...
Can I just jump in there? Because I think for all Germans listening, it's interesting to hear that at many American schools, it's not necessarily mandatory to take any second language, right? And then like sometimes there's college requirements or there are some language requirements at the high school.
Yeah.
But there's even some Americans that have never really learned a second language. And people can usually choose themselves, as you said, when they start and how many languages they want to learn.
Exactly. I don't necessarily remember what the requirements were at my school. I'm pretty sure the way that they convinced us to take foreign language classes is that you kind of need it to get into college.
Because in Germany, you're kind of forced by the school. Like,
exactly.
I'm going to get to that in a second, but every German, I'm pretty sure, even at the Hauptschul level, which is like the lowest secondary school, everyone has to learn at least one second language, which usually is English.
Yeah. So, yeah, I had the choice of what language I wanted to learn, and my school offered German, Spanish, and French. Spanish was definitely the most popular language. French was the second most popular, and then there was German. And I don't want to say the weird kids, but normally the weird kids would learn German. So I was one of the weird kids.
It's challenging, right?
It's challenging. It's not a romance language, so people don't like the guttural sounds of it. And I always thought it was super interesting, though, because growing up, very typical American, I saw a lot of World War II movies, and like the History Channel has turned into the Nazi Channel here in the U.S., like alien Nazis, and like there are all of these documentaries about World War II.
We have that too, like NTV and N24. Those are two like 24/7 news channels in Germany, which we don't have a lot of those, but those only have an actual news program every now and then, and like in between they always show these Hitler documentaries.
Yeah. So I grew up watching a lot of that stuff, and I always thought it was super interesting, and I was interested in World War II history. And then I come from a German family. I'm like half German, half Irish, essentially. So I was always interested in the German heritage of my family.
But hold on, when you say half German, half Irish, I feel like most Germans or like Europeans listening to this will
like
think that...
Like my parent is from, like my mom is from Ireland, my dad is from Germany. That's not the case. Kind of in my ancestry. So my family has been in the U.S. from, I'm pretty sure one side was here during Revolutionary War times. And then kind of, I'd say 4 or 5 generations ago is when the Irish and the German sides of my family came over. So they're actually, on my dad's side, there's both Irish and German, and on my mom's side, there's Irish and German.
Okay, interesting.
So it's kind of just like chemistry, pouring everything together.
Right.
It comes out about 50-50.
Okay.
I actually know where in Ireland my family is from, but I don't know where in Germany my family's from. So I was always interested in my heritage, which is very common here in the U.S., that people want to know where in Europe your ancestors are from, or where your ancestors are from in general.
Yeah, I get questions about that a lot too, that people ask me to help them to find their ancestors in Germany, or like
Which is
where
really
they
hard.
where they can start the research and stuff like that. And since I've never really done that for like my family or anything, I don't have a lot of tips. I have some tips, but I think people should rather like, ask other people and
Actual
not me.
experts. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I was able to find like the immigration card of I think it was my great-great-great-grandfather, or my great-great-great-great-grandfather who came over to New York from Hamburg. So
yeah,
I
that was
think,
one of the main ports, I think, where they left from.
Exactly. So I'm pretty sure, because it says something about Hannover there, Hanover for the English speakers. But I don't know if that's actually where it was from. And back in the day, Germany wasn't necessarily the way that set up the way that it is now. So I think my family's from northern Germany, but I don't have any specifics about it. But back to my language learning kind of process, I was always interested in my family's heritage. So I decided that I would start learning German. I actually, and I think I mentioned this in your YouTube video at one point, but I was talking with one of my counselors, like the academic advisors, I think is the new proper term for it. But
yeah, which we don't usually have at German schools. But
they
it's
help
a
you
pretty
figure
cool thing.
out, depending on what your goals are long term, what classes make the most sense for you. And I had taken some Spanish classes in middle school and wasn't like in love with it. So she said, well, you have such a German heritage, why don't you try out German? So that's what I ended up doing.
And also your last name is pretty German, right?
Yes, my last name is very German. So I started learning German, and the cool thing was my high school German teacher, there was only one German teacher in my school, and she was from Germany originally. So she grew up in Erfurt, and has a very heavy, strong German accent when she speaks English. So it was kind of like this foreign thing that I thought was really cool.
Yeah.
And her being from East Germany as well, she had a lot of interesting stories of like her Stasi file and like learning about just how the split of Germany back after World War II, how all of that worked. And I think she used to tell the story of when the wall fell, everyone wanted to go west, but she and her boyfriend at the time decided, let's go to Prague because no one was there.
Okay.
Because everyone wanted to go west.
Yeah.
But then she ended up coming to the U.S. and she's been here for like...
Back then already?
Yeah,
wow.
pretty close after the wall fell
Cool.
that she ended up coming to the U.S. So she's been in the U.S. for I think like 25 years now.
Wow.
So she's an American citizen now. She has dual citizenship. So she just has a really interesting story. So that was something that kept me really engaged in class.
Makes sense.
And from the beginning, learning from a native speaker, it's like this is a huge opportunity. So I thought it was really interesting, and I was really engaged in class. And she was an amazing teacher too, or she is an amazing teacher. She made a big point on making sure that you're speaking and your grammar doesn't have to be perfect, but the point of language is to communicate. So as long as you can make yourself understood, that's fine. Obviously, the more you study, the better you should get at making yourself more understood, because grammar is the way that you can communicate, what's the word I'm looking for, very finite and very nuanced meaning. So it's important, but at the beginning when you're learning a language, the most important thing in my opinion is just to talk. So she was very engaged with the class and had us speaking a lot. And I was the oldest person in the class because it was German 1 and I was a 10th grader. Most of the people in my class were 9th grade. So
high school in the US usually always goes from 9th to 12th grade, right?
Yes. So, and for you Germans, you may have heard the terms freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior. I might end up using some of those terms in my description. Freshman is 9th grade. Sophomore is 10th grade. Sophomore is 10th grade. Junior is 11th grade. And senior is 12th grade. So when I started learning German, I was a sophomore in 10th grade, and everyone else in my class were still freshmen. So I was more advanced, quote unquote, than the others. So, and I was really engaged in class, and I like learning. So I was kind of that kid in the class, like, oh, the know-it-all who always has all of the answers. And I was the only one in the class who was really trying to speak with a proper accent, which is something that's, I would say, very common in the U.S. is that the students here and even the teachers who teach foreign languages don't necessarily try to use much of the accurate accent of native speakers.
Yeah.
And oftentimes you get made fun of in class if you try to pronounce a word correctly.
Like you're the pretentious person.
Yeah, so I would always try to say ich, and they would all say ish.
Yeah. They said ish instead of ik.
Yeah,
Okay.
so my teacher being from the East, kind of Central East, she tended to say more ish when she spoke. So she would rather hear ish than ik.
Right, which I think I would prefer too even, yeah.
Yeah,
Makes
so
more
I would
sense.
say, so a lot of people, and I probably said it at the beginning too, I would say ish, I would say nisht. So a lot of that type of accent. But I tried really hard to pronounce things properly. So there were some people who made fun of me for that, but look at me now. So
In
yeah,
your face,
exactly.
losers.
So I started, it came really easily to me, and I was really engaged in class. And because I was the oldest, I wanted to progress quickly. And my teacher recognized that I kind of had a talent for learning German as well. So she pulled me aside and said, hey, if you're interested during the summer to learn German 2, so that way you can be in German 3 in the upcoming school year with your kind of classmates, people your age, I'd be willing to help you. And we had a couple like tutoring sessions throughout the summer. So
there wasn't even a class. It was
No,
just
I
the
just
two
caught
of you.
up.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and that's kind of like another thing with the US, like you're a lot closer to your teachers. It's not common that you'll like go to their house or anything, but there's a lot more willingness to help you and be on a more personal level.
Yeah.
So yeah, she met with me and I learned all the German 2 material over the summer.
So that's usually 3 months, right? Summer break?
Yeah, summer break was 3 months. So I learned a school year's worth of German in 3 months.
That's
but
crazy.
I have to say, obviously I didn't learn everything as well as I would have had I been in the class. So like for a while, my food vocabulary wasn't the best.
Oh yeah, I remember you keep bringing that up every now and then when we talk about food, and you're always like, well, I kind of skipped that level, so I never got all the food vocab.
Exactly. So there are quite a few things that over the years now I've learned, but it took me longer because I hadn't actually sat down and learned the vocabulary. So I did that over that summer, and then my junior year, so my 11th grade year, I was in class with everyone in my grade. So that was kind of a fun class, and the focus of that class was more on conversation. So we'd all learned most of the grammar at that point. The only thing we hadn't really learned were like the strict adjective endings rules, which we then learned in that class, which I thought was really interesting and fun, and trying to figure out where to put what ending. All of you German learners out there will know how it's pretty much a nightmare.
Yeah, maybe we can put like a little table in the
show.
YouTube video, because it's insane. I didn't even know about it until I started teaching German in the US, and I was overwhelmed by those like really complicated tables with all the different cases and different genders and indefinite versus definite article and all of that.
It's very confusing.
It's insane. I'm just so glad I didn't have to learn it.
I really enjoyed learning it, and I'm really glad that I'm glad that I enjoyed it so much, so it didn't feel like work.
Yeah.
Because now it's internalized in me.
Yeah. Did you kind of feel like it was like solving a riddle or something like that?
Yeah, it was
Okay,
like
cool.
a puzzle. Like, ooh, how do I get this so ingrained in me that I don't have to think about it? Because obviously Germans don't have to think about it, so I shouldn't have to think about it either. Was my mentality. And kind of rewinding back from the beginning, I always had the thought inside of me of, my German ancestors spoke German, so I should be able to. Like, it's in my genes.
Like, you knew you could do it.
And it kind of had to do something with a book that I read in middle school called Percy Jackson and the Olympians. It's like a series, but it's about a demigod, so half human, half god. And they were automatically able to speak ancient Greek. This main character was able to speak ancient Greek because his dad was a god, a Greek god.
That kind of reminds me of Yu-Gi-Oh! Totally different thing, but I think he's like half an Egyptian god or something like that. I watched it back when I was a kid. I don't even really remember.
Yeah.
But I think like he also always, it's an anime, by the way, for all the older people. It's like this really popular thing where people always played the card game afterwards. But I think he always was able to speak Egyptian or some other kind of language because of that too.
Yeah. So, and I think that probably was a huge factor in my success. Is I just had this internal drive, like I know I can do this.
Very ambitious.
And I'm going to.
Yeah, so you basically put your, how do you say, your goals very high? Isn't there like a saying?
You set really high expectations of, yeah, I think that's what we would say.
Yeah,
I swung for the fences.
Yeah, well, you know what I mean. Like you really, set your expectations really high for yourself, and that's why you probably achieved it too.
Yeah, so that was then my junior year, where it was just kind of the conversational class, and not enough kids signed up for German 4 for my senior year, so that class wasn't offered.
Oh no.
But I still wanted to continue with my German because it was my favorite class, and I really liked my teacher. She was amazing, and she offered then for me to do a independent study is what they call it, of AP German. So AP stands for Advanced Placement, which is a system here in the US, which is you take a college level course in your high school. So at the end of the year, you take an exam, and if you get a good enough grade on the exam, you get college credit for it. So you don't have to retake that class at university. So I did an independent study of German 4 then, which involved more complex like grammar forms, like I don't need to go into the details, but like ist geworden as opposed to just wurde. A lot of more
the past tenses,
various different forms of conditional past tenses and passive past tense and Plusquamperfekt and all of the crazy stuff, which I loved. I ate it all up. And then I spent a lot of time in my free time just watching German TV. I downloaded ZDF Mediathek, which is like a
public TV channel in Germany.
Yeah, it's a public TV channel, and they just have like a library of all of their content. And I think this was before they got super strict about like geolocation, so I had access to a lot of shows.
Yeah, and that was probably also before you could watch a bunch of stuff on YouTube, because I think nowadays there's so much German content out there. But back in the day, like the websites or like the TV channels, libraries were like the main thing to go to.
Yeah, exactly. So it was like 2013, 2014. And that's when
that's like a while back. It's
crazy.
crazy.
Is now to think about it. But yeah, so then I just spent a lot of time watching them. My family also had an exchange student from Switzerland in my junior year for 7 months.
That's pretty long. And that's pretty common in the US, right? Because there's so many people who do a high school exchange.
I wouldn't say it's like super common for a family to host someone. Okay. We didn't actually even plan on hosting him. He had a pretty bad experience at his first host family home, I guess. And I got to meet him at school, and he was from Switzerland. He spoke German. I was like, this is kind of cool. So I went to my parents. I was like, hey, this guy is in a really bad situation right now. He was actually going to have to change school districts if he wasn't able to find, and this was into the school year already, so he hadn't met people. So he was going to have to change schools if he couldn't find a new host family. So I talked to my parents, and he came over for dinner, and they said, yeah, let's do it. Why not? So then he came and lived with us for the rest of the school year.
I guess I meant like by common, not that like it's very, very common, but I think there's just a lot of people who do a high school exchange in the US, whereas I don't think I've ever even met anyone in Germany who did that for like a year.
It's definitely common in that sense.
Yeah.
We, at my high school, every year we had 3 exchange students, not necessarily from Germany, but that year we had Fabian from Switzerland. We had someone from Germany, who's now one of my best friends, and then someone from Slovakia.
Cool.
The year after that, we had 2 Germans and a Spaniard, and so it's very common here in the U.S.
Yeah.
So that definitely spurred on my interest in. I drove him to school because in the U.S. you can drive at 16, so we didn't take the bus, but I drove us to school, and we had the rule that in the car on the drive to school we would try to speak German.
Oh, that's cool.
So I could practice.
But did you practice standard German with him or Swiss German?
I wouldn't have been able to understand Swiss German at the time. But then when his parents came and visited, I was exposed to Swiss German. I was like, what is this?
Did they not know how to speak standard German? Or
no,
was
they
it just,
could. And they spoke standard German
with each other, they spoke Swiss
exactly.
probably. Yeah.
Or like, and he would Skype with his family or FaceTime with them. And I would hear it. I was like, that's completely different.
What is that? Yeah. Many Germans feel like that too.
But over the years now, I've actually gotten pretty good about understanding it. Which
you're better at it than I am.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
But yeah, so those were all contributing factors to why I was so interested. And then I graduated high school, and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to study at university. And I was interested in languages and wanted to continue with that, but job opportunities with that aren't necessarily the best. I mean, you can find work, but it's a lot easier to have that as a complement to some sort of technical degree.
Right.
So that was kind of the direction that I got advice from various people, specifically my father, who said, it's great if you want to continue with German, but make sure you study something that's also going to provide a living for you long term.
Interesting. I don't think I even knew that you thought about only studying German.
Yeah, I thought about only doing German or linguistics. But yeah, so I ended up double majoring at the time with mechanical engineering and German studies. And going into university, I was at a higher level than a lot of people who also were studying German studies. Oh man, I sound like a Streber.
What's a good? It's not nerd or geek. I don't think there's a good translation for it.
There is.
There is.
I'm trying to think what it is. Streber.
Shall we look it up?
Yeah, let's look it up real quick.
Okay, let's see who gets it faster. Nerd, geek, SWAT, wonk, overachiever.
Oh yeah, overachiever. I guess geek. Geek is gonna be the best.
I kind of feel like nerd would even be better than geek. Yeah. I don't know.
There we go. A try-hard. That's
a try-hard?
That's okay. What we would say probably. Okay. So I definitely am a bit of a try-hard when it comes to German. So when I started university, I was 2 years ahead of everyone else when it came, because in the German studies program, you spend essentially your first 2 years learning the language and then the last 2 with literature and history. So I just jumped to those classes. And it was really fun and something that I really enjoyed. So I just stuck with it and then got my double major in German studies. During that time, though, since I had a technical degree, I started in mechanical engineering, but then switched to industrial management. I was doing co-ops, which is kind of a University of Cincinnati specific term for internships, essentially.
Oh, is it?
I don't know if it's a UC specific term, but not everyone knows what a co-op is. It stands for cooperative education, where you make money. You can't do an unpaid co-op, essentially.
Yeah, so it's like a Pflichtpraktikum is what we call it in Germany, except that a Pflichtpraktikum could technically also be unpaid.
Okay, exactly. So during that time, I had my technical degree that I was working on. So I was working at companies and doing these internships. And Cincinnati is a very German-heavy city, not only in its heritage, but also there are a lot of German companies in the area. So I was working at these German companies where there were then Germans who were working there. So at work, I always got opportunities to speak with Germans, and I was also involved in various German organizations. So I was surrounded by German a lot. And then I ended up going over to Germany and living with some Germans for an internship for 3 months. So that lifted my level even higher, being with native speakers constantly. And it's kind of just evolved from there. And
when was that internship? Is that the time?
That's when I was in Erfurt in 2017?
So you're saying that lifted your level? Because when I met you, your level was already at the same level that it is now, in my view.
Yeah, I think for me, my confidence was lifted more.
Interesting. Because we met
before that.
Yeah, we met 2016. So it was your third year in college? Second year in college?
Yeah, I think it was my second year in college.
Yeah. And you sounded like a native then.
I guess, yeah, that may have been the case. But like for me, and we talk about this a lot, I think we tend to be really self-critical. And I think that's a human trait in general, is that we tend to think we're a worse, wie sagt man das? You're always your
worst enemy?
No, your worst self-critic.
Yeah.
Or your worst critic.
Yeah.
And I think that rings true for me, and I think for you too.
Not as much, for sure.
Okay.
We'll get to that when we talk about my story.
But specifically with languages, like you were talking to someone in English earlier today, and you were concerned about your level, and I was like, it sounded completely normal to me. Like I didn't think you were struggling at all.
I wasn't exactly concerned. I was just like, you know how sometimes like you want to say something and it just comes out really weirdly, and that happens in German too sometimes, and that kind of like happened earlier.
Yeah,
I was like, wait, that was weird what I just said. Like you want to say something and you can't find the words in your head.
Yeah, I think we both feel like we sometimes have bad English or bad German days.
Yes, true.
But I think to most people looking at us from the outside are like, that's not a bad day.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely am self-critical. I don't think I am as self-critical as you are.
Yeah, that's possible.
But for sure, because otherwise I think you wouldn't even notice any mistakes you make in a language. And that sometimes baffles me when I see it. See, that's what I mean. That sometimes baffles me when I see it with other people who just like have been learning a language for years or have been living in a country for 10 years and still make these really, really simple mistakes or like beginner mistakes. And apparently they don't notice it. And I guess that's definitely something that I share with you, that I notice my own mistakes.
Exactly. But kind of why I was talking about being self-critical is I think my time in Erfurt for those 3 months kind of lifted my level of being self-critical and having confidence in the language, because that was the first time that I was really immersed around it constantly, like getting used to talking about cooking in the kitchen, or like
the everyday stuff.
I specifically remember learning like, where does this belong? Because I knew the word to belong is gehören, but where does I was holding something in the kitchen. I had to ask one of my roommate's girlfriends, where does this go? Like, where is its place where it's supposed to stay? And I didn't know how to say it because like gehören doesn't really make sense there. It's hingehören. Wo gehört das hin? But I specifically remember not knowing how to say that. And I started the sentence and she's like, wo gehört das hin? So those type of little things, I think really, that was the period where I really felt like I got more to a native level speaker.
Yeah. No, I can totally relate to that because that's what happened when I did my exchange semester in the US. Those like little everyday phrases and stuff like that. Yeah.
So kind of from there, it's just been kind of a natural progression now. And I don't really spend a lot of time actively learning vocabulary, which I would like to do, because I know there's a lot of vocabulary that I don't know, because, and for those of you who aren't super into language learning, there's a kind of an idea of an active vocabulary and a passive vocabulary. The active vocabulary being the vocabulary and the words that you use on a regular basis that you have quick access to in your mind, and the passive vocabulary is the things that you understand and don't even think about because you understand them when you hear it, but you so rarely use them that it's not really part of that. Would probably be random access memory in technical terms, that you can grab right away and use.
I didn't even know those terms.
Yeah, so I feel like my active vocabulary is pretty large in German, but my passive vocabulary is even larger. So I would like to put some effort in and bring some of those words from the passive vocabulary into my active vocabulary. But yeah, that's kind of the general story of how I learned German. It's something that is interesting to look back on, especially now that I hesitate to say that I'm fluent in Spanish, but I mean, I can spend an evening with a whole bunch of Spanish speakers and understand probably about 85% of what's going on and not have any issues.
Yeah, and you kind of started getting back into that like 2 years ago?
2 years ago,
yeah.
Exactly. And that process has been very different from the way that I learned German, because I didn't have a ton of formal education in Spanish. I took a couple classes and I went back to Spanish language school just to get a couple quick helpful things like tips with grammar. But I think because I'd learned all of this grammar topics, or just learned German grammar in the past, it came really quickly to me. So I ended up not going to a lot of those classes because it was too slow and boring. But it's interesting to compare my German learning experience to my Spanish learning experience, because my Spanish learning experience has been very much immersion. Here in the US, in my group at work, I was one of two Americans in a group of like 8 people. So I was constantly surrounded by Spanish, and I had that.
So all the other people were Spanish natives?
Yeah, they were all Mexican.
Or like,
Spanish
native
speaking.
Spanish speakers.
There you go. So that's just been a different experience of my technical Spanish is actually decent, and like talking about work topic things, being able to give criticism and express my feelings about work in Spanish is normal, but a lot of the everyday words I struggle with because we don't use them all the time in office. But it's interesting to compare those two experiences. But yeah, that's kind of the general story of how I learned German. I don't know if you had any questions. I think
maybe I'll just get to my story, and then we can get to the questions that the listeners had for us.
So why do you speak such good English?
I don't know. Okay, I told you my story is going to be a little bit shorter than yours, but I guess let's go back to when I first started English. So first of all, you're kind of surrounded with English in Germany just by like music on the radio. Movies, not so much because they're usually dubbed, but a lot of the movies and shows that are on TV and in the movie theaters are American movies. So like just even when it comes to just the names or cities or things that you see on TV, there's a bunch of like American and British culture there. I remember growing up, like, there was a time when there was hardly any German-speaking music on the radio. Yeah. And I remember that every time there was a song on the radio, I asked my parents to translate every single word. And I was really annoying about it, too, because I was like, wait, but you speak English, so can you just tell me what they're singing? And then they tried to, like, translate it at the same time, which is really hard to do.
That's something that Americans can't conceptualize, is listening to music that they don't understand.
Yeah, and, like, the thing is, for me, even nowadays, it's sometimes hard for me to listen to lyrics because I'm so used to just like having the music in the background and they're just singing something that I don't understand. Even though nowadays I would understand it, I'm just used to not listening to English-speaking lyrics or not paying attention to them.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah. I know a lot of Americans or English-speaking people, probably mostly Americans, when they get to Germany, are really confused why all of the music is in English.
Yeah.
Like, these are American songs. We're in Germany. Why are they listening to American songs?
Well, I have to say German-speaking songs have become a lot more popular again, but especially in the early 2000s or like late 90s, there was hardly any German music on. I would say nowadays it's almost back to like maybe 50-50 or 40-60, like probably still more English-speaking, but German-speaking music has had a comeback. Anyways, then, I mean, obviously English is like the world language, so everyone in Germany pretty much has to learn some English at some point, and most people learn it for years in school. So I think I had my very first English lessons in like 3rd grade, but it was pretty much just with our normal teacher who like taught pretty much every subject, and her English was pretty bad. She was like, I don't know, over 60 or something. Okay. She was older. Or maybe she wasn't even that old, and I just think that because I was a little kid. But in my mind, she was pretty old, and her English wasn't very good. And we just
to all of you 60-year-olds out there, we're not saying that 60 is necessarily
My parents
old.
are over 60, and now they seem really young to me. But, you know, as a little kid, you just have a different perception of age. We just learned some basic vocab. I don't even know how many times a week we had English class. I think it was pretty much just once a week or something like that. And I remember that we learned things like an apple, a tree, like the very basic vocab, you know? Yeah. So I think we had that in 3rd and 4th grade. And then in 5th grade is when we really started learning English. And I remember basically we started at 0 again because I don't think every elementary school had German class.
Okay.
And
English
I remember
class,
that.
You mean, right? You mean English class?
What did I say?
German class.
Oh, gosh. Yes, English class, of course.
I hope that they all had German class.
Yeah, we did. Oh, and I remember that I was one of the only people who could already do the English ABC or alphabet. Oh, yeah. And I remember that one of the first lessons with our teacher was like, he said, okay, what is A in English? And when people raised their hand and was like, it's A. And then he was like, okay, what's B? And then I raised my hand and I just did the rest. So I was like, so I was kind of like
you. B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U.
Exactly. That's what I did. So I guess I was kind of like, you said, like a try-hard in 5th grade. In general, I was always really good at school. So I was for most of the time, I was the best in my class, which like in Germany, classes stick together. So like you stick with your group of people, especially through elementary school, but even later in secondary school. It's like when I say the best in my class, I mean like throughout all subjects, basically.
Yeah, but you mean your like the class, not necessarily the grade, though, right?
Yeah. So
but
by
then
class,
I know you were the best in your grade too.
Yeah. So no, I don't think
you were
I don't know.
valedictorian though, weren't you?
I mean, yeah. I don't know if I was in 5th grade, but when I refer to class in a German school, I refer to a group of about 25 to 30 people that had all subjects together. So in my grade, there were 4 classes. Yeah. Okay. So back to my story. I guess I then had English class from 5th through 12th grade because it's mandatory. And we then had the opportunity to learn either one other language or 2 other languages. It kind of depended on which branch you went on. There was like a more technical and then a more language-related branch or, I guess, focus that you could pick. Besides that, you can't really pick a lot of classes in the German school system. It's just all determined for you. So at my school, I could either do English, Latin, and then Spanish, or I could do English and then French and then no 3rd language. Okay. And because I really didn't want to learn Latin, I did French instead. And so I only learned 2 languages, which for Americans is a lot. For Germans, it's the minimum, pretty much.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so I then started learning French in 6th grade. But with English, I have to say that I had a really, really good teacher. I'm trying to think for how long I had him, but we had him from 5th grade through at least 9th grade or so. And then I think I had him later in French.
Was he German?
He was German. Looking back, I'm not even sure how good his accent was. I mean, we definitely learned British English in the beginning in school for the first, I don't even know, like 4 or 5 years. It's only British English. So his pronunciation was probably a more German accented British English.
Yeah.
But he was very, very structured. So big shout out to Herr Unterhuber, because he was one of the most structured teachers that I ever had.
It's the same thing with Frau König.
Yeah. And it's, in my opinion, it's really important for language learning. There's like all these other approaches nowadays with like more immersive language learning and not even explaining grammar and stuff like that. He did the exact opposite. He explained everything in this really structured way. And I think for me, that's the way to learn a language.
Oh, for sure. I specifically remember like the file cabinets that Frau König had, like it was pretty much every single day for every year. Like she just had it all planned out, every worksheet, like it's super organized. So I think it sounds like we learn in a very similar manner.
Yeah, and he had been teaching for years too. I'm not sure how old he was at the time, but he probably was around like his late 40s or early 50s or something like that. So he had been doing this for years, and he had it all in his head. Like he usually didn't even have any notes. He just had it all in his head. And he was really strict too, like grade-wise and everything. But people respected him for that, because you knew exactly what to expect with him, which I think is really important with teachers. And so, I mean, I really liked him, but I was also always was good in English. I think I was one of his favorite students. And I guess I just always had like a talent for learning languages. So I was always really good in English class and in French class too. And then I just kept going. Like I just learned English. I wasn't particularly ambitious though. So I think that's a big difference. Even nowadays, I don't have these like high expectations for myself when it comes to those kind of things. I usually, as a student, I just went with the expectations that others had for me, like my teachers usually. Yeah. And I tried to reach that. And when I did, I was fine. I was happy with that. I just never wanted to disappoint anyone. But I never really had this huge internal drive. So I basically only did what I had to do for a class up until like maybe when I was 17 or so. And that's when it kind of started that I was watching a bunch of, like I just streamed a bunch of shows online. And one of my favorite shows was How I Met Your Mother. And at the time, the show was still going on. And the German dubbed version wasn't out yet. So they had a new season and it was only out in English, and the German version wasn't out yet. It wasn't going to be out until like the next year. So I think that's when I really started watching American shows. And then I did that with other shows too, because like the new stuff wasn't out yet, or because I thought it was more interesting to watch it in English. And I think that brought a pretty big change for my language learning experience.
Would you say that is the point where you kind of switched from British to more American, or like from the beginning, Did you have a preference?
It's a good question. Most people in Europe prefer British English.
That's what I hear a lot.
But we hear more American English with like all those songs. And even I feel like in British music, they oftentimes even don't sound super British. Like sometimes they even sound a little bit American too. So I think my personal preference was always American English.
Kind of just a funny little thing about that. When British people sing English, for whatever reason, I mean, I think the vowels that we use in American English tend to be more open.
Like musically?
Yeah, musically. So that's why it tends to sound more American. But for the longest time, I thought, before I'd ever seen a picture of Adele, I thought she was a black lady from the U.S. Which now looking back, I have no clue how I thought that. Even from the way that she sings, but like at first, like that was the mental picture I had of her. So like,
no, she doesn't sound super British. That's true.
But when she speaks, she sounds very British.
For sure. Yes. But so I guess that was definitely part of my language learning experience, because then like you suddenly start immersing yourself just in these shows, and you kind of know the plot line already, so you like understand a bunch of stuff out of context, and you just pick up words naturally just by following it. But I remember that in the very beginning, it was really hard for me. Like I would start watching it in English and it'd be like, okay, now I don't understand a single word. Okay. And it was really hard for me to follow the flow of the conversation and everything. And I think oftentimes when it was available, I had subtitles on in the beginning, like English subtitles. And then I guess another big part was that in 10th grade, so I guess like maybe even a little bit earlier or around the same time, I did this high school exchange in Cincinnati, which I talked about before in the first episode. So basically, I participated in the student high school exchange between the city of Munich and the city of Cincinnati, who are sister cities. And I got to spend 2 weeks in Cincinnati. It was the first time in the US for me. And I spent it at an American host family. So I was also surrounded by American English, everyday phrases. And I do remember that my English was good compared to the other students because, as I said, I was always like one of the best in my class. But it was still like I was 16 at the time, so it still wasn't super good. So I'm pretty sure I had a pretty strong accent, and I was missing so many words. Like everyday vocab. I've also never really been great with remembering things, to be honest. Like I never remember facts, and I hardly ever remember any vocab. I think most of the vocab that I learned in school, I forgot. And then I had to like relearn it in the US.
I think for me, there were 2 points that I was going to bring up. One being with vocab and learning. I think it's another point to making sure that you actually speak, because I have specific memories of times where I used something wrong or didn't know the word and someone had to help me. And now I don't forget those words because they're so closely associated with a memory. And kind of piggybacking off of that as well, I was going to ask you, from watching like TV and consuming a lot of English speaking media, did you pick up on any phrases or any words that you then used incorrectly or in the wrong context?
Not that I can remember specifically, but I might have.
Yeah, I just was wondering because I have a specific memory because I watched Rosenheim-Cops a lot. And I learned that herein is like if someone knocks on your door that you can say herein. I didn't realize that it was something that was very formal though. Like it just was to me, someone knocks on your door, you say herein. So I was sitting in my apartment in Erfurt and my roommate knocks on the door and I say herein. And he was like, it's ein bisschen komisch, wieso herein?
I never thought about that, but I'm pretty sure that I always said that as a kid. I think as a kid you just think it's really cool to say that because you allow someone to come in. And it's kind of, it's
like saying in English, you may enter.
But you see it in like old fairy tales and like, you know, a bunch of stuff that you consume as a kid is like more formal, I think. So I think I always did that as a kid, but like as a teenager or like grown up, it's more casual to just say komm rein or something or just or something.
I just was wondering if you had an experience similar to that as well, where like you use something and you think you understand it and then you're like, oh wait, it's used slightly differently.
I definitely had that. I just unfortunately can't think of a specific story right now.
So then did you see a huge change in your English from your time in the US then? So you had your exchange program that you did, but then when you came for college, are you able to really look back and see a change in your comfort level with English and your abilities?
Yeah, I think it even changed with the 2 weeks being in the US. Like even that was a pretty big change because suddenly I realized that English was a language to communicate with and like it was something that people actually spoke. I had been to England before, of course, so like I had been surrounded by English, but like living with an American family, and we also like started doing this thing which like for German students is kind of odd to do in the beginning, but we were like a big group of exchange students and we would have these events and field trips planned that we all did together, the German and the American exchange students. And of course, whenever we like talked in a group and there was at least one American in there, and some of these Americans who participated in the exchange students were pretty good at German, but usually their German level was a lot lower than our English level. And so it was common courtesy to always switch to English as soon as there's one American there. And then you basically just like speak to another German in English just because there's someone else there. And I remember that it really took some getting used to that, but we got used to it really quickly. And I think that also lifts the comfort level a lot because Germans have this weird perfectionism in their culture already kind of. So you feel weird sometimes and embarrassed to speak broken English to another German, and then like you know that whenever you make a mistake the other person might think, oh, he said that wrong, I know it better, and you don't want to embarrass yourself, especially in front of the other Germans, because they know what you're supposed to know, you know, like in front of a native speaker you feel like you can make whatever mistakes because they don't know what like what you've already learned in school.
Yeah.
And so I remember that was a pretty big thing for me, that like once I overcame this like threshold in my head, I was like, okay, cool. English is just, as you said, a language to communicate. And it doesn't matter if I make mistakes. It's not a big deal. I don't have to go back and correct myself. As long as I like correct it in my head maybe and like try to do it better next time, the point is not to be perfect.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree.
And so I think that really happened in 10th grade during those 2 weeks. And then when I came back for college, there wasn't that big of a shift. There definitely was some, but I had already been pretty comfortable with English. And like definitely my English wasn't at the level that it is at now. But I think it was more about improving my English skills in like just a language way rather than improving my comfort level, because at that point I was already pretty much I didn't care about making mistakes because I'd already made this other experience and I knew that it didn't really matter. And so I was totally, from the beginning, I was totally fine with asking people for, hey, how do you say this? Or like I started describing something kind of like in the game Taboo. Like I was really good at describing something that I didn't know with words that I did know. And I never even felt embarrassed making mistakes, which I think is a really, really important part of learning a language.
I was just going to say, it sounds like you're almost liberated from the idea of perfectionism and once you reach that point, I feel like a lot of people, like they learn grammar, they learn vocabulary, and then they feel like they plateau because they feel like they have to be perfect because they have all of this knowledge that they should be able to apply. But once you reach that level, I think it's really important to kind of break through and push harder to achieve liberation, if you will. So then you can reach that point where I'm just going to speak and I'm going to improve through speaking rather than being so focused on being a perfectionist.
Yes, exactly. And that's what we talked about earlier when I said that I'm not as self-critical as you are. I used to be in school, and that's why I was always really good at everything. But I also never, even in English class, I never liked to raise my hand and actually speak unless I had everything prepared in my head. And I know that a lot of perfectionists are like that with languages. They listen and they think about how can I phrase this, and then once they have the perfect sentences in their head, the moment has already passed. And that's the thing that you need to learn as a language learner. This is also what I always used to tell my students when I still taught German at the University of Cincinnati. In the very beginning, this is like the main lesson, in my opinion, is that language isn't supposed to be perfect. Even native speakers don't speak it perfectly. It's a means of communication, as you said earlier too. And if you can bring your point across by using some words and maybe some gestures and maybe some English words or something, you have achieved your goal. And as you said earlier too, of course, over time the goal changes and you want to become better at the language itself. But it's really important to start speaking in the very beginning. And I never did that during my time in school until when I was 16 and I went to the US, and I suddenly understood, okay, if I just always wait until I have the perfect words in my head and the sentence put together, I'm never going to be part of this like social group. And like we had great times, like we would hang out at night at bonfires and just have conversations. And it was just necessary for me to drop that and to just not give a you know.
In Mexican Spanish, you would say it's worth mother.
It's worth mother. This means I don't give a
pretty much. Me vale madre.
I think we can even cuss on this podcast because it's our podcast. It's such a big thing in the US not to use curse words.
I generally don't curse too much just because of my upbringing.
I do in both languages.
That's another interesting thing. I definitely cuss more in German.
Yeah, and that's funny because I think it's the case for most bilingual or multilingual people that they cuss a lot more in the languages that aren't their first language because it just seems like it's more detached from yourself, so it doesn't sound as bad. Like when a lot of Germans say the F word all the time, like in English. What else? We say shit a lot. And like that's a thing that's been around for decades. Like my parents say that a lot. What other?
Which was funny for me when I was in Germany when I just heard random Germans saying shit.
Yeah.
Like, because German or Americans are familiar with, they'll say Scheiße.
Yeah, and that sounds so funny. Scheiße. It's Scheiße for all.
Scheiße.
Scheiße. Yeah, I guess with that, should we move on to the questions that people had for us regarding our language story?
Yeah, let's do that. I think we've somewhat touched on these questions, but we should go through them specifically and make sure that we answer what they have there. So the first question is from the Fat Dingo. Do you know what a dingo is?
No.
It's an Australian dog,
Okay.
like a wild dog.
For some reason, what are the birds called that die in Ice Age?
I don't know. A dodo bird?
Dodo. Okay. For some reason, I thought of that.
The Fat Dingo. There's a movie. This we can cut this up, but there's a movie with Meryl Streep where she's in Australia. I forget the name of the movie, but she like comes running out of a tent. They're out in the outback, and she goes, "A dingo took my baby." That was a horrible Australian accent, but
she said it in an Australian accent. That's awesome.
Yeah. So the first question is from the Fat Dingo.
Do you want me to read it?
Yeah, go for it.
You both have mastered English and German, and both of you being from opposite countries. Josh said he started learning German in grade 10, so around 15. What age did you start learning English? Feli, how old are you both now, if you don't mind disclosing? I'm rather impressed with you both being able to speak 2 languages fluently and without an accent. So I guess thank you, first of all.
Thank you for the compliment.
And I think we answered most of this. So what age did I start learning English? I guess in 3rd grade, just a few things when I was, 8, I guess?
Don't ask me because I got torn apart in your video for saying I was
like 14 in 10th grade?
13 or 14 in 10th grade.
You were
I'm horrible. Yeah, I was the normal
16?
age for 10th grade, I think probably 15.
Yeah. And then I guess I really started learning English when I was 10 in 5th grade. And I am now 26.
And I'm 24. I don't have any problem disclosing that information.
Yeah, me either. It's actually in my channel description on German. Thanks for that question.
Yes.
The next question comes from someone called
Arigamis.
For some reason, I read games in there.
Oh, I think it was probably
games.
I think I was trying to read it like it's a Greek name or something.
Right.
So the question is, what are your recommendations for textbooks, websites, and software for learning German? Danke. Bitte, even though we haven't answered your question yet. That's a hard question because with German, I had my school textbooks that I used.
Do you remember what they were called?
I think it's like Deutsch Aktuell.
Okay.
Is what it was called. They were pretty old textbooks at the time though. But yeah, textbooks I don't really have too many recommendations on, but websites, like I said, watching a lot of German television, even if you don't understand everything, I think is my biggest recommendation regarding websites.
And same for English, by the way. Same for learning any language. Just surround yourself with movies, shows, music even, or audiobooks or whatever it might be. Just consume the language a lot.
I 100% agree. And I remember I have specific memories of me speaking German after having watched a German show or listening to music, and a grammar construct, just being able to use it without really having learned it, quote unquote, actively learned it.
You just heard it a lot.
I heard it a lot, and it just sounded normal and correct for that situation.
Right. You kind of develop that gut feeling.
A gut feeling.
For this language feeling is something that you kind of need to learn over time when learning a language, and I think we both have that now. Yeah. But I think listening to stuff is a really big part of that.
And that's how you build it.
Yeah, and listening to native speakers, obviously, because if you only just go to class and listen to your teacher and your fellow students who might make a lot of mistakes, you might not develop that feeling for your language.
Definitely. And as far as software is concerned, I mean, Duolingo is good to get started.
Have you tried it?
I have. Okay. Not with German, but
there's
with Spanish
also,
and Babbel, I think, is something
I was going to say, I think that might even be a German app. Cause
I think they're headquartered in Berlin.
So that's a recommendation too for those kind of things. But those apps are best for just learning the vocab and maybe some basic grammar.
And grammar, yeah. But as far as trying to get into the upper levels, I haven't found them to be too helpful.
No.
But yeah, those are kind of my tips regarding that.
I guess maybe the Easy German YouTube channel.
Yes. Oh, certainly. Sorry, I completely forgot about that. We didn't even talk about working on accent and pronunciation, but maybe that's something that we can talk about in the future. But I found Easy German to be a huge resource. This is the 3rd time I'm mentioning them in this podcast, and there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
I mean, they had their early videos had really good instructional videos on how to pronounce the German R, the I couldn't do that for the longest time, and watching those videos really helped. And also just hearing everyday German, like filler words that are common in German. And I would 100% recommend watching their content to really improve your level. And I even think they just recently started Easy English.
No, I think there's like a bunch of connected sites now for different
Easy
languages. And they also have a podcast, which is in German.
It's in German,
It's in German, yes. So, and they speak pretty clearly and slowly. So if you're a German learner, that's definitely a recommendation to check that out.
100%. And they both speak, like Feli said, clearly in very standard. So they're easy to understand.
Yeah. There's also other YouTube channels, like, for example, by Deutsche Welle called Meet the Germans, or they have like a series called Meet the Germans. And I can just maybe put a bunch of links below because I can't think of all the names right now, but there's a lot of YouTube channels that are very helpful for sure.
Definitely.
Yeah. And I mean, nowadays you can also just go on, it's not as hard as back in the day. You can now go on Netflix, you can go on different streaming portals. You can stream live TV even from Germany on like the German TV channels, websites, and just consume all those things.
Yep. So then our last question is from Dieter Buchholz. Feli, do you want to read it out loud? Because I suck at reading things out loud.
Did one of you have a Kickstarter in learning the once foreign language? I mean, was there an event when you realized how words create sentences and sentences from a context which made sense to you? I had always problems to learn English. I struggled with the grammar and words until I started to listen to English audiobooks. Yeah. Good step. Now I am able to follow talks and my grammar falls often in place without thinking of rules. That's the goal for sure. Grammar rules are a book with 7 seals to me. I have to write and speak English like my mother tongue with the intuition of my belly feeling.
That's
like
100%. Yeah, we would say gut feeling.
Yeah, that's what we just said pretty much.
But I would 100% agree with that. And I think I was going to mention that earlier, but the idea of thinking in the language as opposed to thinking in your native language and constantly trying to translate.
Yes.
If you want to reach a more fluent level, you're going to have to start thinking. You're going to have to start thinking in your target language.
Yeah, which means that because I have said several times that I don't know which language I think in, but it's more the thing that you go from having the German, so in my case, having the German sentence in your head and then translating that into English, going from that to going, gosh, that didn't make any sense. So it's more about going from having the German sentence in your head and then translating that into English to just having the English sentence in your head. So basically translating your thoughts into English right away without this step in the middle of putting your thoughts into German and then into English. So just putting your thoughts into the target language right away is the level that you want to get to. And that's, I think, the point where most people just know, okay, now I really got the hang of it.
Yeah, I even think about it like and I don't even know if it's scientifically backed up or anything, but I almost feel like I use different parts of my brain, like a different part of my head when I'm speaking. Like for me, English is lower in my head. And German is like higher up and forward.
That's
I don't know.
It's so funny
it's weird,
that you like have that visualized. But I think we also talked about that in one of my videos before, and I think we're going to have a full episode on that at some point. That it also sometimes comes with like having different personalities. So like basically, you don't only speak a different language. You speak in a different culture, in a different mindset, and sometimes that goes along with having a slightly different personality in one of the two languages.
And I think like for me too, that's why I think working on my accent was so important, was because like my mouth works differently when I speak German, so everything switches. So I think maybe like working on your accent is a huge part of that too, to really kind of form your personality in that other language. So maybe we can just give a few tips about what you can do to work on your accent. But I think what I did was figure out what are the typical things that give you away as a foreigner or a non-native speaker. So for Americans, it tends to be our hard R that we use in German. So not saying richtig or what's a good Lehrer is an example I use a lot. So trying to reduce that R is something that's really helpful, or something I worked on. So Lehrer I laid in bed for probably a couple hours at some point, like over time, not hours at one time, but just laying in bed going Lehrer, Lehrer.
And you're touching your throat because that's where you produce
it's
the
like
sound.
back. It's like lower in your throat. It's not like forward like the it's the yeah. I can't really roll it, but I get away with it. And like der Regen, not Reagan. So finding those typical things that you as a non-native speaker from your country and with your native language would do and avoid that is something that I think is just actively looking for those is something that helps. Yeah, so with Germans, I think it's like the THs are a big deal.
Right. I think for like just adding to what you said, I think the R for sure. Then I guess the CH is a really tricky sound to make for non-Germans.
There are two versions of it too.
Yeah, but in both versions, I think are tricky to say.
And
and then I think just the vowels too kind of give you away pretty quickly.
Just to touch on that. This was a tip I got from some of my German friends in high school because I was trying to understand, like, to me, I sound like I'm saying the same thing as you. So help me understand what I'm doing differently. Right. And they said that the American O, I think it technically is a diphthong. So you make a lot more noise and it's much like
you move
squishy.
Your
mouth more. So it's like, oh, oh. You don't do that in German.
Yeah, in German vowels, you always make one sound. You do not move your mouth while pronouncing the vowel. It's O, A, E, I, U.
Yeah, not A, A.
Yeah, even with A, you have like A. Yeah.
E, O.
So I sometimes like to describe it as German vowels are more straight. I'm not sure if that's the correct grammatical description, but
neither of us are linguists, so
no.
These are just our observations.
Yeah, with my accent, people ask me that a lot, which I take as a compliment. But I actually never did anything for it. Like, as I said, I didn't really have this huge ambition. At some point, my goal was really just to communicate, and I stopped caring about the mistakes that I made. But I do have a talent for languages, so just by being in the US, I just picked up, and like consuming American media, I just picked up on the accent, I guess. And over time, like every now and then, there were things where people would correct me, and like when they did, or sometimes I would ask for it too, then like in that case, I would be like, oh, okay, I didn't even like pay attention to that. This is interesting. So of course, like once I noticed that I make a mistake, I would try to like do it correctly. But I'm not super self-critical with me regarding that. I think otherwise I would have never been able to start an English-speaking YouTube channel. Like with the perfectionism that I used to have back when I was like younger, I don't think I could have ever done that. Just sitting in front of a camera, speaking my second language, like knowingly pronouncing things wrong. Yeah, I mean, I was sitting in front of the camera and I knew that I'm saying things wrong, but I just had to not care about it. And that's why I did it, because I was already at the point of like, it doesn't matter. It's about communication. And there's also so many accents in the US. And that was also something that I love about this country. Americans usually don't care about it as much. It's even crazy. Sometimes Germans care a lot more about people who speak English with an accent than native English speakers care about that. I would agree with that.
We have so many people in the U.S. There are a lot of accents in the U.S., but then we have a lot of people who learn English as a second language that we're so used to hearing accented English, quote unquote accented English, not American accented English.
Like people from like the Hispanic
India,
countries,
India, from the Spanish speaking countries, from Asia. Yeah. So we're so used to it that it's just, as long as we can understand you, that's what matters.
It's not really a big deal in the US, and I think that Germans should pick up on that. It's funny too, because I know of a few instances where like a native English speaker, I think in most cases, from what I know, like an American would speak English, and then Germans would comment and be like, "Oh, you have a German accent," and they would be like,
"They say that to me."
Yeah,
that was that was one of the weirdest things when I was on your YouTube channel for the first time, and people told me I have a German accent.
Like, I mean,
I make mistakes in English because I speak a lot of German, so like sometimes my grammar is a little funky, or
I make mistakes in German. Every native German, even when they live in Germany, make mistakes.
So maybe I make a few mistakes that sound typical German, but no one would think that I have a German accent in English.
No.
But maybe just you can give a few tips to Germans who are trying to improve their accents, or do you have any ideas? Because for me, I was surprised to hear you say that like the TH wasn't a huge deal for you.
It was never an issue for me.
I mean, there are two different TH sounds in English.
I never even noticed that.
And the.
Like I don't think we learned that in school. I just picked up on that from how people pronounced it. I would say just like Google it. But no, I know that there's
that's what
like,
I was saying is
there's a bunch of tips out there for like how you can improve your accent, and I also know that there's specific tips regarding your native language. So like if you just Google like maybe losing your German accent in English or something like that, I know there's stuff that comes up. I also know that there's apps that help you get rid of your accent, where like, and I downloaded one of those apps because like a while ago, like a few months ago, I was like, I've been here for a while, and I know that for like the time that I've been here, my English could be better even, because I've never actively worked on it. I was here and I was surrounded with it, and that's why I am where I am with my language skills. But I was like, maybe I should be a little bit more ambitious in my life. And I downloaded one of those apps, and then I never did it, of course, which is so typical for me.
I think some other typical examples though are like using hard consonants where you're supposed to use soft ones.
At the end of words especially.
So there's a difference in English between bend and bent, and Germans tend to say bent.
Yeah, because for us, when there's a D at the end of a word, we usually always pronounce it as a T in German. But in English, there's a pretty big difference between the two. And I actually made a whole video about this topic, which like I included 5 mistakes. So I didn't like include a long list. But I can link that below too. There's like 5 mistakes that Germans make in English.
But even if you have a really, really heavy German accent, we understand you.
Yes, and don't be embarrassed about it either. Just talk. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Even though we are doing this kind of right now to make fun of it, but no, like for real, does not matter.
I know Germans who've lived in the US for years and still have heavy German accents, and no one cares.
Someone talked about Niklas's accent in the comments, and like so I think they said, oh, is he doing that on purpose, that he didn't really lose his German accent? And I guess he doesn't really pick up on it as easily as you and I do, for example. I'd say if you and I are
may
like,
not even see the need to change anything.
No, you don't have to change it. Like we all understand him, his American colleagues understand him. He's the CEO of his company in the US. So
at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. It's just a fun thing to work on. And
if you want to. I feel like you can be fluent in a language and you can know all the vocab and all the grammar without having the native accent. You can still have your foreign accent and still be fluent.
100%.
And I think...
Well, cool. I think we're coming to the end of the episode now. We've kind of given you guys some insight into our stories regarding learning languages, and then we also got to have our first little kind of Q&A answering some of your questions.
Yeah, and in the beginning of the episode, I said that we were going to answer some language-related questions and then some other questions on top of that. But I think since we've been going for a while now, we'll just start that new little question segment next episode.
So yeah, make sure you leave us lots of questions so we can spend a decent amount of time talking back to you guys, rather than just talking to you.
Yeah. And we really appreciate all the feedback that we've been getting from the very first episode, all the comments, all the messages. And I guess here's all the ways that you can reach us.
So you can reach us at our email, which is understandingtrainstation@gmail.com.
You can reach us on our website, which is understandingtrainstation.com. And you can also listen to the podcast on there.
You can also reach out to us on Instagram, Understanding Train Station.
And you can reach us and also support us on Patreon. It's patreon.com/understandingtrainstation. And if you want to support us in another way too, you can do that by buying us a coffee on buymeacoffee.com/UTS, which stands for Understanding Train Station. So it's /UTS podcast.
Thank you guys so much for your support so far. Again, we have just been overwhelmed by how well things have gone so far.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
We just are really thankful that you guys, that we get to be a part of your day.
Yeah.
So hopefully, especially with all of the craziness going on with coronavirus right now and cases rising, and we hope that we can brighten up your day through having this little conversation.
Absolutely. I just remembered that we didn't mention YouTube. You can, of course, subscribe on YouTube and also comment on YouTube. And that's where I think we got most of the comments from today, is from YouTube, obviously. So thank you guys so much for watching and for listening. You can also subscribe on all the audio streaming platforms. So like Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts,
Spotify.
And I think we're also on Amazon Music. So subscribe there, leave us a 5-star review if you like what you hear.
Yes, please do. If you don't like it, that's okay too. Leave a 5-star review anyway.
Exactly.
Well, great. Thank you guys.
Yeah, we'll talk to you next week, every Thursday.
Have a good week. Ciao.
Tschüss.